put this on real quick?
Yeah. Testing. Testies. I hope everybody's been getting value, by the way. Thank you. We really do work hard and care. I'm probably not everybody's favorite to talk because I don't like to talk to people up front, but I really have fun working with people, so thanks for letting me do that with you guys. All right. I believe one of the biggest things that you're going to have to learn how to do and understand how to assess is fractures and joints and any kind of movement in slabs. A lot of people think they have a really good floor, but if you were to put a shiny, clear substance on it, all of a sudden you realize it's not that smooth anymore. Raw concrete always looks great. As soon as you'll see fractures appear and all kinds of stuff you never even knew existed as soon as you start putting wet, even clear epoxy down on the floor. You're going to see everything. You start running metallics on a slab like that, little fractures that you couldn't even see with your eyes. You'll see like say if it's copper, you'd see a really sharp little dark copper line where it's sunk into that fracture or whatnot. So understanding how to deal with floors is a really big deal. So I'm going to go over this kind of by steps. First thing I would do on any job is take care of major fractures. You don't want to start doing anything else on the job until you're flat and profiled. So if you have high spots, they're cut off. It's easier to cut a high spot off with a diamond than it is to fill the whole low around it. If you think about a freaking island sitting out in the middle of the ocean, I've seen a lot of people try to fill so much epoxy to get over a 1/4 inch bump in the middle of the floor, and they could have ground for 10 seconds and saved themselves $2,000 in product. So this is my attempt to hopefully save you guys pain and money. Now, flooring and stuff is something I've done a lot of, and I made a lot of money doing it. So most of my jobs, though, came from countertops or countertop advertising. A lot of people with large flooring and stuff like that, large jobs for you to do, they don't always feel comfortable with you running right in and doing a 2,000, a 5,000 square foot job, but they'll start you out on a countertop and then they call you back usually if they like working with you and they trust your product and have you do a floor. Now, the difference is flooring prices where we were saying on a countertop, you're 55 to 85, and obviously if you have huge commercial, you could get down to 30, 35 and still make money, but I'm talking large commercial jobs. When you're doing flooring, it's a different story. So on a floor, if you're on raw concrete that has no damage at all, you have saw cut joints, you can usually start making money if you're a dealer pricing at about $250 a square foot. If you're not a dealer, you're an installer, you're probably going to be about $350 a square foot before you start making money. And that's not counting your labor or your time or whatever you're doing. That's just products, so to do it properly. This is a heavy mill coating, so if you think about it, a lot of our floors are still poured, 50 to 80 to 120 mils, depending on what we need to be at. Now, again, what I explained yesterday, perceived value, solving problems, I generally would target going over tile, but I know you guys are going to have a lot of this at home, and maybe this is happening under tile, and you need to be able to assess it. So you have usually 4 types of things to deal with in concrete. You have a fracture with no vertical movement. I do know this looks like this is higher than that. It's not supposed to be. That usually happens from one thing. What is that? Freeze and thaw, right? What's that? No, not, and that's when you have no vertical movement, no settling or anything like that. You'd see settling if it was a compaction issue. The quickest way to damage concrete, heat and cold, thermal expansion and contraction. So you could hit a concrete with a sledgehammer and not damage it as bad as cooling it down to 10 degrees one time. Especially it depends on how hot it was when you poured the slab, how hot it got when it cured out or whatnot. So there's a lot of little factors. This is the easiest thing to deal with as far as a fracture. The biggest problem you're going to have is sometimes these will be so small you don't see them until you pour. That's why we skim coat every floor, is to hold in air, to trap in any air and keep it under the slab and exiting the side so you don't get bubbles in a top coat, and so you can fill any of these little joints that you don't see. It's very easy to miss some of these when you're mixing your slurry paste or crack patch or whatever you're using to fill your joints, and I'll go over a few of those with you. But it's very easy to miss a few. Then you skim coat your floor, they expose themselves, it's just fine. You can usually run clear DAP caulking or something in there and wipe all excess off the top. And when I mean run some clear DAP caulking, you're not doing that with it. You're literally filling in the void so that epoxy can't seep through. If water will seep through, epoxy will seep through. It just happens slower so people don't realize it's working, that's happening. This is your easiest thing to deal with. Generally what I'll do is I'll make a slurry mix with my gypsum, 1-to-1, the same as filling tile on a countertop. So I mix my epoxy, which flooring epoxy is a 2-to-1 mix ratio. Whatever that total volume of mixed epoxy is, I'll mix that same volume, and that's just my preference, of gypsum powder into that epoxy. So if I have a total of 3 quarts mixed, I'm going to mix 3 quarts approximately of gypsum powder into it. Now that is just my preference of what I like troweling. If you want to go a little lighter because you want it to flow better, do that. It's totally your preference, but I will tell you, this will heat up in the cup, usually patching joints. You pour a bunch out on joints and then you end up pushing a bunch in and you realize you have tons of excess. Mix smaller batches to start with. Whatever I do on a job, if I'm filling 2,000 linear feet of expansion joint, I'm going to mix a quart and I'm going to run it and see how many linear feet I got, and then I'm going to start doing math on my mixes and figure out what I can do time-wise. I'm going to say, wow, that took me 20 minutes to trowel in 3 quarts of product, and it made it 400 square feet, so how many more could I get before I exotherms in the container? Does that make sense? A lot of people act like doing this like, oh, I accidentally was successful. That's what losers do. So start being kind of thoughtful of what you do, and when you see something work, document what you did so you can do the exact same thing again. I do 1-to-1 mixed volume. Yeah, same as the grout joints in a countertop usually, or whatnot, or a floor for that matter. Yeah, whatever my total mixed volume of epoxy. Yeah, whatever my total mixed volume of epoxy is. So I'll add that much gypsum. And that turns it to where it's about as creamy as like peanut butter or something. So if you're way better at troweling, you might be able to go a little thicker. If you don't like troweling, you probably want to be able to pour it in. If you're too thin, you kind of defeat the purpose, and it's going to flow right through your slab and not fill. The cool thing is it saves a ton of money if you mix enough gypsum, and the epoxy still soaks into the sides of your slab, and you get a lot of strength from expansion and contraction. What is your distance if you're on new concrete that you need to have a saw cut or a control joint of some kind in North America? What's that? It should be 8 feet generally, especially in the Northwest and northern areas where it has a lot of heat and cold. 8 feet's about the standard. I do believe if you get down into Florida and some territories that don't have as much cold, you could probably go 10 feet. I was in Brazil and there was almost no expansion joints and no fractures. They poured very good concrete. They had some amazing concrete crews there. And they had almost no expansion joints, but they also have almost no expansion and contraction due to temperature. So the closer to the equator you get, the less of that you're going to have. So any questions? All right. Probably one of the biggest pains in the ass is when you have vertical separation. This happens, maybe you have a yard being flooded next to it. You're going to do SuperTraxx. You have a heavy vehicle parking on the lower side every day. I see tons of issues due to overwatering, lack of drainage, and things like that. And eventually, you get a crack, your rebar rusts through. 20 years later, this piece starts sinking, and you get this vertical separation there. Does that make sense? You would not want to fill this with gypsum and epoxy yet. You'd want to grind at least some of it off. Now, for the most part, what I see is this: you're just going to get as good as you can. Don't lie to your customer and tell them you're going to make a flat slab. I did tell one customer with SuperTraxx that I thought I could make their slab pretty flat, and they held me accountable to that, to where they were waiting until like 6:30 p.m. and they were looking. This is a woman from Grand Junction. They were looking at fucking shadows when the sun was just right down, and they were looking to see if there was any shadows casting off the high or low spots. In the daytime, at noon, you could look anywhere you wanted. It looked perfectly flat. You could have probably rolled a bowling ball across it without it turning, and they still were seeing little shadows. So under promise, over deliver, set their proper expectations, and surprise them. So that is kind of my goal here. I'm going to cut off as much as I can. The best way to do this is not with a big walk-behind grinder. It's with probably a 7-inch handheld grinder. Has anyone ever ground with a diamond blade on a 7-inch grinder? Yeah. Just use a cup wheel. You do need to start thinking about dust. Who lives in a city with over 1 million people, over 500,000 people? You do have fucking OSHA out there right now, the communists that we talk about. And they're looking for you making a tiny bit of dust, and they're probably smoking in their truck while they drive around angry about a little bit of concrete dust. So the reason I don't wet grind, who here has used water for dust mitigation? I love it. It sucks with epoxy though, because moisture is your enemy with epoxy, so vacuum. They make some awesome HEPA vacs. I am not a rep. They've tried to get me to rep that vacuum system. It does work pretty well, and the Maverick grinder is a very good option as well. I've had guys that have ran whole entire garages, and we did tons of them in 3 or 4 hours with a 7-inch cup wheel and a vacuum setup. So anybody that thinks you need a walk-behind grinder or even a bigger one, we actually use another one that's about 4 times that size. And sometimes by the time you get it offloaded, you get it started up, you hook it up to the vac system, make sure that there's enough amps to pull and you're not popping the breaker, you could have had the fucking thing ground already. So especially with vertical surfaces like this, don't even go over the edge with that or you're gonna bust the cups right off the bottom of your head. So, so you end up in a lot of situations where the big badass tools that you're afraid cost you too much money don't even work anyways. So I would grind this, then I would try to float out what I could with epoxy, then I would grind this back and forth the next day, try to smooth that out, and I'd probably float it one more time. Usually when I float it, I'm using a pool trowel just because I like the rounded edges. They tend to not dig in on a high and a low. Does everybody know what a pool trowel is? Yeah. The longest one possible. The longer, whatever you're screeding it with, the longer it is, the more of a slope. You might use a little more material, but it really helps. Probably one of the best things you can work on that I see is a saw cut joint. Who knows what a saw cut joint is on a slab? Is there anybody that doesn't know? Okay. Instead of troweling a big butt crack into the concrete with a tool, when the concrete's wet, a lot of times they'll pour a slab and then they'll run back over it in 8 to 12 hours with a saw and saw cut the joints. They're not cutting all the way through the slab. They usually, depending on your slab thickness and how deep the rebar is, they're going to choose a depth and actually cut the slab deep enough that they intend it to break right on that joint. Now, it looks just like a nice cut, but if you were to look down in that crack, not like it sounds, you're going to see there's a fracture in the bottom. You pour epoxy over that and you're going to lose it all right through that saw cut. A lot of guys try to fill them, then they call back and they're like 80% of my joints all flowed right in, and now I have to refill them and then I have to pour my floor. So understand what's happening and why they did that. The easiest way to do this, in my personal opinion, we have a 2-component fast curing epoxy that shoots right out of a dual cartridge gun. If you have a lot of linear feet, you run it with that. If you don't, mix the same gypsum mix. The big thing you don't want to do, you want to slightly overfill this. You do not want to create a pile. You're wasting material. If you put too much in, if you put too little in, you need to do it again. But if you put way too much in, just think about it. You're wasting a whole lot of material and now you're grinding. And not only are you grinding, you're going to have to wait a while to grind until it actually cures up enough to grind. So if you use the dual component cartridge system, if you have a ton of linear feet of saw cuts, it's kind of nice because you can slightly overfill it and then you run back with a razor scraper and just shave the top right off. So it's the fastest way. If you have like a 20,000 square foot lobby or something, do it that way. If you don't, use a gypsum powder and grind. If you are grinding, make sure you're not, if you haven't ground a lot, make sure you don't take a diamond blade and run a nice straight line right down that joint. You're going to easily see where that cup wheel dug into the concrete and you're going to have another issue to deal with. So be kind of thoughtful. I try to say that it's almost like you're massaging it into place. When you're working your cup wheel, you're trying to keep it flat and work your way across it. Keep constant movement. If you sit still, you're going to get a cup wheel mark wherever your grinder stops. So.
Brand new concrete, would you fill those joints regardless?
I always would, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, always, yes sir.
Well, you mentioned using DAP caulking before on the very first fraction. How come you just don't start filling up with all DAP and then?
Well, I'm talking about very small joints that you kind of missed, because you're going to have a lot of movement if you put DAP in this, and then you're trying to pull your skim coat over the top. You're going to start pulling a little bit of that DAP out every once in a while, and it turns into a nightmare. So definitely the epoxy is better. And DAP is more when you know there's no significant movement that would damage the floor above it. This right here, you still have a lot of expansion and contraction working on there, so I would pour epoxy with gypsum because it's going to have a lot more strength. It's going to bond both sides. So only use DAP if you're not needing to bond both sides of something. Otherwise, you're going to have some issues. So now, this right here, that is a tooled joint. Everybody know what a tooled joint is on a slab. So they have usually 3 main sizes of control joint tools. When they're pouring fresh slabs, a lot of times instead of coming back and saw cutting it, because they never thought about that like 40 years ago or something, they would run a tool trowel across it and it'll create kind of a V, separated enough, you're getting that tool down deep enough into the slab to where you control the fracture right there and make it happen there if they do it correctly. What most people don't realize until you make it all glossy, and you'll see this when you see a shiny floor, you'll notice especially your intersections where those tool joints cross, but a little bit everywhere, you displaced material and it pushes it up on the sides. This is a little excessive, but just kind of to show this. Now, I had a class one time and we were doing this lady's garage, We told her to clean her garage, but she's from Grand Junction, so do you think she cleaned it? She told my whole class that everybody was standing there. Well, I know I told you to, but I figured there's one way. You'd have to do it before you started, and I'd get a free clean garage. So we already did her fucking floor for free. So, but to not disappoint, we cleaned her garage. And then the grinder I had delivered didn't show up. And then I believe something was busted on it when it did show up. So you know what I did? I did something backwards, and it taught me a lesson. And I had done enough to know I shouldn't do it, but I thought, I'm just going to show them how to trowel in and fill these expansion joints today. Well, we ended up not being able to heat her garage very well, so it didn't cure very fast, and this is very hard to cut. You wouldn't believe cutting through an extra 1/4 of an inch because we hadn't profiled first and cut the high spots off, if that makes sense. We had to cut down through soft epoxy and this, and it took us probably 5 times longer than had I just waited or fixed the grinder or done it the correct way or gone and got a 7-inch. I should have done something different. I did what I thought was easy at the time to keep everybody happy and keep things flowing, and it caused me a whole lot of pain in the ass. I never again in my life will not cut this off first, profile it. You're going to use a lot less epoxy to fill this little joint. Then you can come back the next day and kind of feather it out with your grinder. It's very little work. Really nicely cured concrete grinds very easy. You have to wait for epoxy to cure up for at least 24 hours under good temperature before it grinds very easily. Any questions on that? All right. I always ask this. Who knows a contractor, or maybe you are one, that says a customer has something that's kind of a pain in the ass and that's not what you normally do? And a lot of contractors are like, that's not my job. I don't move a fucking couch. You guys ever hear people like that? They're always telling you what's not their job. And usually they're driving a piece of shit and they're struggling and they can't get business cards printed because they can't afford their rent and everything else. And they don't realize they're so picky about what they don't do that they probably don't do a whole lot of jobs either. So knowing what you shouldn't do for safety or maybe risk management factors is important. But just saying you don't do it because you don't do it is fucking stupid. So you have no clue how much of a stress maybe disconnecting a sink is to a customer. If you say, hey, when you call a plumber and get your sink disconnected and schedule for him to hook it back up, I'll come out and do your countertops. I bet you get 10% of the jobs you would have got otherwise if you had said, oh, don't worry about it. Yeah, I have my own plumber, and you call the plumber, because guess what? You should be a fucking expert. That's why you're here, and that's why you're doing a business. You don't belong to be in business if you're not smart enough to call a damn plumber. That customer, they don't know if they should call an electrician sometimes. They have no clue who they should call. And then they're worried about trusting a second person they haven't really interviewed into their home. There's all these factors that aren't a big stress to us because we know how easily we can deal with them. That's a big stress to a customer. I made a lot of money by taking care of people's problems, and I believe the bigger problem you solve, the more money you make. So I did a lot of water and fire reclamation stuff for a while because it was good paying. Who does that? Who loves being in a customer's home when their house just flooded and their kids are trying to go to school and they're kind of pissed off that they can't access bedrooms because you're like, dude, we're still pumping out the basement, or trying to dry a floor, and yeah, we're tearing out your carpet because it's going to turn moldy, and they're always disappointed. I had one claims adjuster that did a lot of the paperwork on some of the jobs I was on, and to say the least, he was just fucking lazy. And I started noticing, I'm like, I don't think he gives a shit about this customer. He's just trying to check stuff off of every single job as quickly as he can so they can make money. And he came in and did a moisture test in the middle of a floor. He didn't ask me where the water had been, where the water damage had happened, where the leak was. He didn't ask anything about it. He goes, beep, and then he signed his clipboard. And I said, hey, do you know where the water came through? And he's like, oh, you're good, man. You can set the floor. And I was putting engineered wood back down. Have you ever seen cupping? Have you ever seen wood put down and the moisture soak up underneath of it? Yeah, and whose problem would that be if I'd installed that wood and said, well, he said I could do it? It would have been my fault, right? And I was like, dude, that's bullshit. How does a moisture test work? The average cheap handheld moisture meter, what's it doing? It's checking for continuity, right? It's seeing between two probes how much continuity there is between this probe and that probe. So even in concrete, you guys have definitely seen a non-marring moisture meter, right? That's not, that you don't drill in, that all you're doing is touching the surface. You could have massive water 1/8 of an inch under the slab and a somewhat dry surface, right? Also, if you don't know what caused the leak in the first place, how the hell do you know that it's not intermittent and it's going to happen the next day because maybe it's exterior? In this case, I went outside and found out that it was because of her irrigation schedule. So she would have just kept reflooding that every single day because she had added a bunch of bushes to the side of her house, and she was probably just like me. I'd like to say she was dumb, but like, if I'm gonna plant something, I'm just gonna start pouring as much water on it until it turns green or dies. I'm not a fucking plantist or whatever what was the Martian? Botanist? Yeah, I'm not a botanist. So, and so I had to get her to do some kind of drainage and adjust her schedule before I would touch this. Now I know a lot of guys would have made the money and been like, it's not my fucking problem if it fails. Well, what if you actually made it your problem, took care of the customer, and then the next time her house doesn't flood, but she wants a remodel, she actually calls you because she trusts you. I just wonder how people think that success is such an accident sometimes, and how some people are successful. How many of you have worked super hard to be where you are today, and just douchebags will tell you, you're pretty lucky. Yeah, dumbass. Like, work until 2 a.m. to take care of my customer to keep my word was me being lucky. Like, me skipping something fun so I could buy what I needed for the customer's house was me being lucky. Like, and I think we are lucky to be in the position where we can do those things and make the right choices. But it's hard work. Like, you're not lucky if you're successful. It's very deliberate. So in these little things, that's all goes into success. This one job being done wrong could have lost me 10 jobs if she talked about it. So it's just something I really think about. What I couldn't believe once I started looking at this, because I had my own moisture meters and I'd taped pieces and I'd done all different types of moisture tests. And what I really started realizing, and I traveled the country doing a lot of different big jobs, is that usually you could tell more about what was going to happen with water flow underneath the ground by looking outside at terrain and understanding if there's drainage off a hill. Downspouts off of a roof have caused tons of problems. I bet 50% of foundation problems are happening because they're putting water in the wrong place that's coming out of gutters, and they're putting it right next to their house. They might even have it piped under a sidewalk, and it's not sealed, and just tons of water soaking through that concrete into the mud or down a stem wall. If you've ever seen how much water a roof can displace, it's really ridiculous, especially if you're in somewhere where it rains a lot. So fixing those problems, and I started where moisture tests all passed, being like, hey, we've got to fix your downspout. There's something, the guy ran over the little, whatever the fuck, that little folding kick-out piece with the lawnmower. We need to replace that. And people will be like, oh, no, you don't have to. We'll do it sometime. No, I'm actually not going to do the job unless I do this. So I'm not charging you for it, but it's going to be done. And you need to make sure it's down. Don't leave it up to the side of the house. That's what's causing your problems. I actually got in an argument with a guy that worked for the city, said he guaranteed my failure, and he said that if I fucked with him, that he was one of the head engineers for the city of Grand Junction, and he'd make sure I never worked in this town again. And it started because I tried to have him adjust. He had curbing around a yard. He never had less than 2 inches of standing water in there. Never. Standing water. Even after he watered. He would fill that up and it would flood, and it was such mud underneath. He must have had it just watering for 4 hours every day, and it never had time to drain, and it was clay underneath. And that was always just soaking right under his foundation, under his driveway, and into his garage. And he wanted me to do something. And I said, man, I'm just telling you, if you want to do it right, you just got to do it right. I'm just not going to do the job unless you can adjust that. He got so mad at me. He tried to force me to do the job. Well, guess what? I don't fucking work for you. It's a good thing I don't work for the city. So he even called me and asked me if I cared about my kids. So then I drove to his fucking house. So then we talked. So this customer here as well, I also made him put in a French drain. And I did that and a few other jobs too. Is there a Leah that's smarter than me here to go to just a touchy board when I can draw? Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm going to try to be an artist here, but I'm not, so be patient with me. This is a floor, guys. I know, that's about my skill in drawing. Oh shit, that's not. There we are. Look at that. You should be proud of me. Now, there was a dude, once upon a time, who crashed an MD-80 back east, and he was a pilot, and he was the only survivor. It killed 102 people, I believe. And I didn't know this until he called me, and he was super upset, and he needed his floor fixed. He bought a house. They fucked him. He bought it from out of state. And then I showed up, I was like, what a dick. And then I show up and I realized the whole situation. He was paralyzed from the waist down. From the accident, he was going through a ton of medical issues. And he'd purchased a house here in the valley, and the whole center had settled. There was so much drainage coming off this hill behind here, and there was like a river coming down right in his backyard. There was a slight patio outside the glass that was just completely cracked in half, and you could actually see down through the slab, and you could see gravel, and it was just washing the dirt away underneath the house. I couldn't believe the gap between the dirt and the bottom of the slab was just crazy. And I was like, holy shit. And he said, well, don't worry. My attorneys are getting this whole house probably torn down. We're either going to rebuild it or move to another one. The contractor was suing the engineer was suing the dirt company. Everybody sued everybody. And I was like, well, I hate attorneys, so what do you want from me? And he said, my wheelchair literally couldn't get from where he needed to get to even the other side of the house because the gap was getting so wide and it was dipping so bad that he couldn't get across this gap very easy. It was catching the wheel on there. So I was like, well, I'll try something, but don't ever hold me accountable to this. And I made him sign a whole bunch of shit saying I'd never be back if this didn't work because I didn't trust it to work. I would just try to help him. So I said, if you cover materials, I'll do this. And he was like, okay, sure. So I had to fix his drainage first. So I said, we have to put a French drain in. A French drain is just a drain that water drainage dips down into, anything flowing on the surface or down to the level you dig the drain in at, and pipe it off to the side. If you don't know what a French drain is, YouTube it. The fracture in the house, the soil, of course, had settled away quite a bit down the center of this fracture. And this was a huge room. Just the one room was probably 800 to 1,100 square feet. I can't honestly remember. This was like 7 years ago now. I brought in buckets of sand and started pouring them in here, and just like an hourglass, it just kept pouring in and pouring in. I think I brought like 3 buckets at first, and we ended up putting like 20 buckets of sand under this house. And we started actually tapping on it. Now, it was crazy. They must have used like Ultraflex 3 or something, some kind of really flexible mortar, because this was a travertine tile floor, and not one chunk of even a piece of travertine separated off that slab. It just broke and kept all the travertine perfectly in shape and separated. So I wasn't really worried about the travertine popping off if I epoxied, especially since the house was getting torn down, if that makes sense. And travertine is very porous, so I washed it with alcohol to make sure that my epoxy would penetrate, so I wasn't worried about a bond at all. So, and I didn't know a whole lot. I hadn't done anything this extreme at the time. So once I got done sweeping all the sand into these gaps, and I just ended up dumping sand and taking hours with a broom, pushing back and forth, just keep pushing it into the crack. Then I vacuumed all the excess up, and I actually vacuumed it back out of the crack just a little bit because I didn't want sand blocking my epoxy from pouring in there. Then I made a very wet epoxy slurry using the same quartz you guys applied to the boards the other day, and I started pouring it in that slab and just pouring it in. Now, I poured at least probably 6 or 7 buckets up and down this crack, 3 to 4 gallon mixes of slurry, and it kept settling in. Then I actually started pouring some wet epoxy on top and just letting that soak down through there because I wanted this whole pile of sand to be very saturated that was underneath that fracture. And I told him, man, this is just my best case attempt. I was so worried, I just kept warning him and warning him and warning about it. So, and then I was stressed after I did it that it wasn't going to hold up or whatnot. I came back the next day, I ground the center. The whole center of the house had settled a little bit, and we ended up actually flooding it twice and just pouring a pretty thick coat over it. And turned into a sheet of glass that looked amazing, way better than you could guess, but I was just expecting to get a call someday. Last year, he came up to the steps at another building of mine looking for me, and I happened to be over there at the time. And I was like, oh crap, I forgot about this guy. I bet that's falling apart now. And I said, what you doing? And he goes, hey, would you mind coming out and looking at my house? And I was like, sure, I'll come look at your house. And he goes, yeah, my wife smokes and she drops her cigarettes on the floor and they burn holes in the floor. And I was, it was making little brown stained spots where the cigarettes were burning off on the floor when she fell asleep. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, how's your slab going? And he was like, oh, it's amazing. I sold the house. It looks beautiful. So, and his wife had been waxing the floor every day with like 4 different things. So there was literally about a 1/4 inch of wax that we had to remove. So I called the company to remove the wax for him just to try to help him out. We actually polished most of the little cigarette burns out and it turned out perfect. And I could not believe walking into this room, they didn't have any rugs down or anything, and you couldn't even see a shadow of that fracture happening anymore. So maybe the whole house will fall in a hole someday. I have no idea. So But it impressed me with the strength of epoxy versus any kind of self-leveling concrete or something that would have been way more invasive to the customer to try to fix, and I guarantee it wouldn't have been as strong. Most of our resins will test out at about 15,000 PSI if you mix them properly and cured them under the proper conditions. The difference is, though, is flexibility. Concrete, even 5,000 PSI concrete, that only happens with correct humidity, temperature, even altitude can affect concrete pores due to density, altitude, or whatever, so you can get better cures under different conditions. Epoxy, if you're at the correct temperature and you mixed it correctly, you should always get 15,000 PSI, but the difference is the flexibility. That's why when people tell me PSI, I'm not really that impressed. I want to know about shock resistance. So, because that's really what's going to protect you from something like this breaking again. Does that make sense? Any questions on this? The big thing you're going to do if you get into floors, if you want to make money at floors, you're going to have to be in some situations like tile floors and stuff that people might not like to be in. When you want to be making money and you're in weird situations doing that, you better be a person that actually cares about the customer. I can tell you that I will stop selling to anybody that I think does crap work because they can't give the rest of us a bad name. So use the forum. Who here has logged on to the Diamond Coat installer group? It's a private group. If you message Diamond Coat installers, they'll add you to that group. And the cool thing about that is, so you don't have to be the guy that's complaining about his girlfriend or the job you fucked up last week and then trying to advertise your products on the same page. You can diagnose your problems on a private installer group where there's I don't even know how many people are on it, but hundreds at least of guys that will give you help. Yes, sir? Facebook, yeah. It's just, and the other nice thing about it is it's 2 in the morning on Saturday and you're stuck in this house trying to fix it. We are not in the office at that time. So you can still throw it out on that private installer group. And I've seen guys at all kinds of times of the day and night get immediate feedback and answers to questions and help them out. And sometimes I can even respond. But you get a lot of response very quickly from a lot of very professional people on there that have all been to training, and most of them have experience. Some people like to hear themselves on most groups. I've never really seen that in this group. It seems like everybody in the private installer group seems to legitimately care about just working with each other, helping each other. I've seen a lot of guys travel and help other guys with entire jobs. We have a guy, Jeff Kirk. He's driven like 3 times to help other people with major jobs just to make sure it worked out right. So definitely join that group if you plan on getting access to different answers and questions and everything. So there's that.
Diamond Coat or?
Yeah, just Diamond Coat, yeah. But you guys are all Diamond Coat installers, so you'll all be accepted, 99% of you. Any questions, guys? Yes?
So, if the floors, like, how do I, what's a good way to ascertain what might be on the floor? Because I'm in a house where the floor itself had like some sort of coating on it at first.
Was it failing? Was it failing?
Yeah, it was failing. It was like when I hit it with the alcohol, it came up.
I would grind it off and hit it with more alcohol.
I ended up grinding it off, but it created a massive, it was inside a house, it was just a ton of dust.
Vacuum grinder. Yeah, you need a vacuum grinder. Now, because of HEPA laws, it's actually very illegal. So a lot of rental companies you might call around are getting forced into buying really nice HEPA vacs now. And I would probably not buy a HEPA vac, and that's just my own. Some of you guys probably know a lot more about concrete grinding than I do. My personal belief is every time something becomes mandated, all the shitbag companies charge 5 times more than they should, and then they're developing such new technology every single year. It makes the $10,000 grinder a $2,000 grinder next year, and it's going to just keep happening until we get into this market more to understand some of the real dust-free tools. Guys have been doing it for a long time, but now that the actual laws to where they're counting how many particles you're capturing and the size of them and stuff like that, you probably want to really watch and wait this out. And you could probably even buy some used very good vacuum tools and vacuum grinders for very cheap. So if you even ever want to go that way. A lot of things like that grinder right there, you go up 7 stairs, what a pain in the ass. You go to a basement with that, what a pain in the ass. You might go right back to a really good system, a dust collection system that hooks to a nice cuff on an actual grinder. So be thoughtful of that. Also, you always have corners anyways, so you're always 7-inching some of it. But failed coatings need to come off every single time. So now, if it's just an ugly coating and it's not failed, I would sand it. So say it's another nasty epoxy floor, run a sander over it. And if it's not coming off, don't take it off. Leave it down and then pour over the top of it. It's just sealing up the slab and helping you anyways. But always run a skim coat. So Now I'm going to go over moisture. So if this is your slab, you probably should say no to that job, I guess. So watch this. I'm going to do something for the first time ever. I'm going to pretend this is water. Oh yeah, it worked. If I can make that disappear now. Go away. There you are. Yeah. So moisture, hydrostatic vapor, hydrostatic pressure, whatever you want to call it, it's just moisture coming up through a slab. Outgassing is another problem. Both are very similar. Moisture is a little different issue though because of the water itself. Water can block epoxy from penetrating a slab, right? What does alcohol do when it comes in contact with water or next to water? Yeah, and it also absorbs it into itself. Alcohol will draw water towards itself, right? Acetone will not draw water out, but it will mix with it well, correct? So that is correct. So 99, I've seen guys spray like 70% alcohol. Make sure if you're spraying alcohol to suck moisture out of a slab that you're using pure alcohol. Don't use alcohol mixed with water to get water out of a slab. So I would spray, here, this alcohol is red because it can burn. Don't burn it. I have burned it off of very safe areas before, possibly. Spray the whole slab down with alcohol. So do all your prep first. You've already ground, you've already fixed your expansion joints. Then spray the whole slab with alcohol. It draws the moisture out, and spray a lot. Get the room as hot as possible so that evaporation, it pulls the moisture up to the surface and evaporates off. And then we're going to mix small volumes where you're going to get about 150 to 250 square feet per gallon of epoxy, and you're going to mix 7% acetone. I don't write that in the book because I'm not going to be legally liable for you. It's a trick that if you want to do as an installer at your own risk, it works very, very well because acetone will mix with water. This is not an oil-based epoxy. It's not a solvent-based epoxy. So as long as you only put acetone in with it, it's not going to float on top. Moisture was really a nemesis forever with almost every company, and it still is because they have solvent-based epoxies. And what does solvent do when you pour it on water? It floats on top. So with 100% solids product mixed with acetone, you can also get penetration and a very good bond in a moist slab by mixing acetone in with your epoxy. Now, 7% acetone to epoxy per volume. So do the math on that, depending on how much you mix, and be kind of accurate. You don't want too much. Now you're going to run a window squeegee across the top of this with your skim coat. And the reason I say a window squeegee is like a magic trowel. Does everybody know what that is? So a more flexible squeegee. You can't pull enough material. You're going to be leaving so much material, you're going to be getting bubbles. Now, if water or air push up through this slab into your coating and you have a thick enough layer down, if that layer is thick enough that air can be trapped in it, it will be trapped in it, and then you're going to have a bubble. Then you sand this bubble off, you cut it off the top, now you have a freaking hole again, right? So be kind of thoughtful. Your job is to not just technically coat the slab with a squeegee, it's to take your time walking back and forth, and you're trying to work in as much as much epoxy mixed with acetone as possible so that you can really get it to penetrate the slab, because you're trying to get it to bond down into that slab and force any of this moisture now that was coming up through the slab out to the side of the slab. Does that make sense? So now the other thing, water movement can create air movement too. So sometimes they have a lot of drainage around a slab or something, and the slab isn't a good situation, but it doesn't mean air is not pushing underneath. And that can happen from irrigation schedules and all kinds of things. Water moves very fast in soil, and people do not recognize it. So be very thoughtful of that. You're going to immediately notice on your first skim coat, if you see any bubbles where you see that it exposed something underneath that popped and there's still any kind of hole there, you do need to run a second skim coat. The bad news is you lost another 12 hours off the job for that to dry. The good news is you're probably going to get 200 square feet per quart on your second skim coat because you're using a squeegee. You're pulling it nice and slow so you don't leave excess product down. And the only place you should be leaving it is in little bubbles and low spots and cracks and fractures. Does that make sense? So be kind of thoughtful when you do this. It's going to save you a ton of money and time when you pour your flood coat. So any questions on water? If you had, yes, sir. I'm glad you asked that. There's a reason we wouldn't color a skim coat. Two reasons, actually. One, if you colored it with a metallic, any little dips are going to be dark spots that you're going to have to figure out how to deal with in your top coat. The other reason why I would never color it with a base coat like the liquid pigments is because adding that into the mix does not allow penetration the same as a clear epoxy. A clear epoxy, the molecules can actually penetrate concrete much better than a colored epoxy, which is really funny because almost every company I've ever seen in the world makes all their prime coats colored. And I talked to one of the top spectrum analysis chemists in the world that studied this for 20 years, and he says, no, it's a fact. They just do it because it's probably the nastiest yellow crap you've ever seen. They mix a pigment in with it, and we know it's blocking penetration into the slab. So it's kind of sad. Try to make sure you're using your clear epoxy to do this so you can penetrate the slab better, because you're really trying to get it to bond in. Have you ever seen hot tire pickup in a garage? Yeah, right where the tires are. That just happens because you have your slab. Oh, shit. Can't even control my board. There. Well, I guess the slab's blue today. So you have this nice thin layer. We'll do a different color now. We'll do red. You have a really red, cool epoxy under your douchey Lamborghini. But it's basically paint or epoxy, right? They call it epoxy, but it's a catalyzed paint because it's from Lowe's or Home Depot. It gets zero penetration into the slab. And why? Because it's water-based or solvent-based. What happens when solvent spills on concrete? It soaks in, right? What happens when a colored epoxy goes onto concrete? It doesn't penetrate very well at all. Same with water, right? Colored water epoxy. So it absorbs the only carrier that made that product flow, absorbs it right out immediately, sucks it into the slab, leaving the epoxy on top, and you park your little Lamborghini on top of this. I just did it because it's red. Can't imagine anybody wanting a red floor. And the tire was hot because he was racing around trying to drive fast to impress his mom. It heated up this coating right here, and it fractures because it expands at a different rate than the concrete underneath. So, anybody own a Lamborghini in here? No? Okay. Is there any Mormons today? Thank God. So, anyways, there you go. So, any questions on that? Make sure that you call the office and get questions. Go onto the installer forum if you have jobs. Answer the questions. It's so much easier to ask it before you get in a bad situation than try to get it on the spot. Yes, sir?
Right, so when you have a floor that's been sealed,
Mm-hmm.
is it necessary to grind it?
If the sealer's not failing, I wouldn't.
Right, because I did a bit on a job for construction, and I was telling them, don't worry about sealing it. I gotta go in and, take care of it. But previous jobs, they told me, it's sealed, so
My biggest fear they're using like I-33 or some real shit sealer. There's a lot of like really cheap like white cap cells. It's basically like pouring motor oil down, and it's gonna hold your coating out. So tell them, don't freaking seal the slab. My epoxy will work better. Now, if it's a good interior job and you don't have heavy vehicle traffic on it, like if it's like a forklift, like a hard tire that's gonna be on it, don't let them seal it because they're gonna block any penetration that you could have gotten, then you would want to grind so that you really can soak in and get that shock resistance from that hard tire hitting the concrete or a rock chip or something like that. But if it's a lot of normal houses, if it's sealed, what I would do, I'd probably sand it if it was too glossy, make sure I have a mechanical bond on anything glossy, and then I'd run my skim coat over it to see how well it really was sealed. So, because they're not thinking about a decorative epoxy coating usually when they're trying to seal this. And then think about this, a lot of the solids rate of most of these sealers is between 18 and like 35%. What does that mean? If you pour a gallon down, how much actually stays on the floor? From less to a quart and up to about a quart and a half of actual solid products that stays in the slab, right? Now all that solvent absorbs out immediately and saturates into the slab or evaporates, and you end up not getting a whole lot of anything in there and not very good penetration. So just be kind of thoughtful of what you're doing. So just reseal and probably sand if I thought it was sealed, just to test to see what they really did. Any questions, guys? Yes, sir.
Well, in my situation, I'm in a production kitchen where there's a lot of proteins and stuff that have been on this floor. It's really not sealed. A lot of water flow has gone through the cracks
Uh-huh.
over the years. What kind of preparation would the different...
Can you get everybody out of the building for at least a few hours?
Everyone is out of this kitchen production area.
Yes, saturate it with alcohol and scrub that, and it'll really be dissolving any grease, oil, stuff like that, and absorbing. And you could even just grab a scrubber or a short push broom and really scrub that in and keep squeegeeing it off and let it evaporate. So that's generally what I would do, and then I'd put acetone in my top coat, skim coat, just so I really still can bond.
And the previous times water penetrated the slab, I mean, is there anything that would need to be done as far as drying?
Just
Attempting to dry.
keep as much airflow going the whole time until you, as high of heat and as much airflow as possible, which means a lot of people will circulate air within a room, but they don't open windows. You need to have fresh, clean air coming in, fresh, clean air going out, the heat turned up as hot as you can get it, and cross ventilation. It doesn't have to be a high amount of airflow, but it has to be steady, that as that room is hot and moisture is evaporating out of that slab, that it's carrying it outside the building, if that makes sense. And you'd be surprised, I mean, we have a guy doing a pool today with epoxy, and that pool's been around for 15 years full of water, and it's right off the side of a house with bad drainage, and it's at the bottom of a big hill with bad drainage. And he already has mitigated the moisture in about a week and a half with just heaters under there. It immediately just turned to where there was so much water on the tent that he built. He threw plastic over the top because he's working in the wintertime doing this pool, and it just looked like it was raining on him. So I went in there, and every time the wind flopped, just tons of water would flop back on the floor. And he said, oh, it's a lot less than it was. It just keeps getting better and better. And he just keeps ventilating it and throwing a heater in there overnight. So don't die with carbon monoxide poisoning, please. So unless... Well, good.
I'm in the Midwest, so a lot of basements, they're new, but you recommend running a couple dehumidifiers down there?
Yeah, I would if you could, yeah. If you have access to that, yeah. Otherwise, just airflow and high heat. And then alcohol to pull it out. The one thing, don't run your alcohol until you're ready to do your skim coat. Does that make sense? Don't do your alcohol until you're ready to do your skim coat. Do it the same hour. Because what you really want is if there is any water pushing up through the slab, and then you suck it off the top and dry it enough for penetration, and then you come back in the next day to do your pour, you got to do your alcohol again. So you might pour alcohol if you have a ton of moisture, like on his job. I'd probably do alcohol a few times, spray it down, and I'd use a backpack sprayer, and I'd probably pour a good 4 gallons if it was an area like the classroom size. I mean, I'd put a significant product down and let that soak up whatever moisture out, and I'd see if it kept getting better and better. Another cheap, inexpensive way that's very effective to do a moisture test, if you're in a warm or humid climate, you can throw down a 1-foot square of plastic that's see-through and duct tape it. Use Gorilla Tape, something with really good bonding adhesive around the sides. Make sure it's really sealed to the slab. Leave it there for 3 days throughout your job, and you're going to see if a bunch of moisture collects within 6 hours, or if you get a few little drops of moisture after 4 days. Leave that in a corner during your prep. So it's just a real inexpensive, and leave it where you think the moisture is most likely to be. So
What are you taking now?
yeah, a piece of plastic, square, clear plastic. So, and then it just traps any moisture trying to evaporate out, so you immediately see if you have a ton of moisture or not. Yes, sir.
Back to that Ferrari garage. So let's say there was no original crappy paint job on it, and that Ferrari's got studded tires.
Go to a sand coating or something like that, more durable. Do you know what like the white striping paint? They have glass beads or silica in it because you want the tire riding over the top of that silica and trying to compress that instead of riding right over paint and wearing it right off the road, and that's how they actually last several years. So go to something with aggregate in it if you have studded tires. Be careful, or do a really decorative floor and throw a mat down where they pull in and out. If he can afford a Ferrari, he can afford a floor mat. Yes, then this. Very good. A lot of people have done that, yeah. I like personally in garages doing SuperTraxx or something like that because I don't ever want to put my decorative epoxy in a garage floor. I personally, if I was doing a business, I'd never put the same epoxy like this ever in a garage for any reason unless the customer had already had me do inside the home. Does that make sense? If you're charging 15 bucks a foot to do epoxy and then you go in the garage, you might discount them down to 8 or 10 or something like that. If you're 3 or 4 in a garage, you're never going to be able to get back to 13 or 14 back in his house again, ever. So you can really price yourself out of the market. So do one of the mica flakes like we have. I think we have one on display over there where you roll epoxy in them. I don't honestly have time in this class to go over that in too great a detail. It's very similar to the SuperTraxx coating, but you're broadcasting flakes instead. You vacuum and scrape up the excess flakes, sand any little high spots, and you do the same urethane coating. I also believe Dom is trying to urethane your SuperTraxx right now. The coating's out back. So, yes, sir.
We're doing basement
Yes, sir?
and it's got tar,
Okay, that's a good question. What kind of tar? How much and where?
really thin coat. I can take a scraper and scrape most of it, but it doesn't clean at all.
If you have something like that, I would just mix 7% xylene. Xylene will mix with oil. We did the New York City garages, and they said, hey, it's a brand new building. And my buddy that showed up to actually run the job, he's like, yeah, it's a nice building. And he's like, but it looks like it's about 40 years old, and there's a thick coat of grease across the whole floor with dust. This building hasn't been inhabited for a long time. He asked the guy, he's like, isn't this a new building? And they laughed, and they said, it's new to us. So they just were trying to get a really cheap bid. I didn't know exactly what to do, and New York, probably these fucking communists and Bloomberg. Don't come to my class, Bloomberg. And after we washed the floor with a little bit of simple grain, and we mixed that product into the actual epoxy, we did that coating. I could not believe how well that bonded. And about a year later, I got a letter of recommendation from the city thanking me for what an awesome job we did, and that we were such philanthropists that we took care of a problem, because I made a little bit of a complaint to them. So it was awesome that it held up too to city vehicles and jack stands and all the stuff that they were doing to fix all the city vehicles in there. So it really proved me that it will stick. Now, I also have stuck it to asphalt that's been frozen in this town and wintered like 4 or 5 times by using xylene in my mix. So scrape off what you can, mix xylene in, and in that case, I would just mix like 7% because you don't want too much, because a lot of times the tar on top of concrete may actually be sealing that concrete, so you're not getting the penetration you want to. So does that make sense? All right, I hope that was helpful. Any other questions, guys? All right. Leah? Dom, somebody? Anybody? Did I just lose everybody? I believe you guys are going to learn how to sand samples. So this afternoon we're going to do the floor last, just so you guys can access anything you want to in here. So let's go over and see what we have to sand. What they're setting up. Oh yeah, this is now. Okay, cool. Yeah. So if you guys want to be a little bit patient with us, I think we have 20 sanders, so only half of you guys will be able to do it at a time. It's going to take about 10, 15 minutes with it. We do want to go to lunch in 1 hour. We want to be out of the building in 1 hour. So take your time in there sanding that. Dom's setting up out back an area to roll the urethane on your SuperTraxx boards. One thing we did not do yesterday was pull our tape. Good luck. So we'll see. We'll see. It may pull. Some of you guys look pretty good at pulling stuff off. I bet you got it. What's that? Yeah, and I didn't even think about it until today. No, should have waited about 4 hours and then done it, but by that time I was long gone. Yeah, knock the sand off, and then try to pull your tape, and then Dom will have an area. Huh. It doesn't matter, but it stinks so bad in here, I don't want it in the building. We'd have to send people home.
Yeah, because it's only 30 degrees.
Already clamped on a sample and put the DeWalt right there next to it.
Awesome. Thank you, dude.
I picked that other one. I think it'd be really cool.
The other one of these?
Yeah.
Okay, wet or dry?
Huh?
Wet or dry?
Wet.
Wet. Okay, cool.
I need to fill up water.
I do the sanding class, so you can teach that. So yes, ma'am.
Leo told me to be here this morning in the sides.
You guys work. Don't worry about that.
I know. He just wanted me to make sure I told you.
No, I totally understand. I hope he feels better.
I know. I waited and waited and waited to see if he was gonna
No,
feel any better to go, and I'm like, I'm leaving. If
you can only do what you can do, and I
Yeah.
totally understand that.
Yeah. I did it for mine fit, and he came back and just got it up, and he's like, "You did it again." I told you, like, don't do it. And I'm like,
It's
when I know I'm not supposed to do
it's
it.
so easy to, but it's crazy how much money you can save by cutting it down a little bit.
Well, and I did the mistake that you said yesterday
Uh-huh.
about putting too much epoxy into a hole
Uh-huh.
and then doing that, and I did when I was just went to do a repair on one of our jobs.
Yep.
And
It's
he came back the next day and he was so pissed because he had to grind it down. And
you know what though? That's how you learn with SuperTraxx is just doing it. So there's no way to be perfect on every single thing your first time.
I know he just likes to play.
You know what though? You're
I'm like, okay, I had a brain fart. I didn't do it.
You know, Bobby said, "Could you help me mix epoxy on a job I'm doing because my wife mixed it?" And I said, "You know, it is your wife because I bet she's the one that'll never mess it up again."
Yeah. And that's totally else.
Because everybody messes that up. I've messed it up. I've made every mistake. I just try not to make the same mistake twice.
Yeah. Well, Leo's like, I bet you won't do that again. But when
Oh,
I
she
pulled all
won't.
the sand off,
Yeah.
it was actually thin.
Right? No, that's.
So, I don't know if I didn't have enough epoxy on them or.
I'm sure it's good.
It stayed really thin. It wasn't as dark
If you
as
feel like it's nice and smooth, then it's all that matters.
smoother than what I thought it was.
A lot of it has to do too with how even the epoxy is poured.
Yeah,
So
that's true. But yeah, when I did move, I got so
Now, so if this is on a garage floor, you just sweep everything off, scrape it off, and then
yeah, yep. I'd vacuum all the free sand first, and then start pulling my grout joints and sand anything high. I like your shirt.
satisfying to vacuum.
I use
sand.
for wool, mixed with wool.
It'd probably make it sag a lot. You mean for fractures though?
For moisture.
Oh yeah, for moisture, I would do it like a thin coat to block moisture, definitely. So, but you could also even use countertop epoxy with acetone to seal it and just mix it because it's going to turn really liquid. You can roll it right into the wall.
Like with a roller.
Uh-huh. No, that'll work really well. So, do you want this? Well, I don't know if it'll fit in any of your bags. But if you need some samples or something like that, since you're flying back and you don't get access to this very often, let me know.
I had a suitcase yesterday, but it's not. It will not fit there.
Right, no, that's understandable.
We'll probably want to take yours up to 3,000.
Yeah, and we'll just leave me like up to 5.
Everybody else,
And then we'll pull, just remind me to pull those pads, yeah.
are we trying to save this at all?
No, don't worry about it. Yeah, don't worry about saving your sand, guys.
I might have one.
Levi,
Yes.
I did cross patterns and it didn't come up. What should I do?
That's tough, man. I just, next time we'll just remember to pull it sooner because there's a lot of epoxy down there. So it looks good, man. I like how you mixed the sand and then poured it out like you did. I've actually never done that. That's badass. Good job, man. That, for your little girl, that's so badass, dude. That is so bad. You're a good dad. I like good dads that care about stuff like that. So half of you guys keep working in here, like the far side of the class stay in here and don't even peek. The rest of you guys can come in here and watch us work. Who has my Monica Lewinsky apron? It's just all stained white. It's just all stained white, like the exhibit. Remember, the court exhibit was like the white dress. Yeah. Oh, little extra white, two-tone white. Yes, to hold cigars. Hey, we got aprons, Dom?
Yes, sir.
Oh, just tell me, I'll find them. Okay. I'm gonna do something weird-ish that I've never done before to try to.
Something in my nose.
You got something? Is it a booger? We'll try to make an apron. I'm trying to make an apron. What's that? Yeah. No. Well, I'm sorry, man. Trying to make a apron here. Oh, there's my aprons. Sorry. I get Monica? Yes.
And if anybody else wants aprons, I'll just put them over here on the table.
Yes, sir. Like it?
Fingerprints.
Does she like it? Does Carrie like it? Badass. That's badass, dude.
All right.
The new mix? Gangster as fuck. Is that the one we did? Like you and me when I was there?
No,
No, next day?
yesterday, yeah.
Good job.
Flour or corn flour?
That's what I
So is there any brand or tool that you might favor more than another?
Yeah, so I always use either Flex or Flex tools are amazing for, it's like an automotive polishing system you can buy. Also do granite tooling, so I loved them when I did granite stuff. They're probably the best possible tool for this, but you get a grinder and setup for $1,200 bucks. I don't like when you drop my shit all the time and break it, so I give you guys like $70 DeWalt's. So if you're pouring, as we did, I think it's very important to use water in a house because you're just going to gum up so many pads at the surface and not get very much done. So that's why I'm using water. Also be careful though, these sanders are set up to collect dust and they have holes in them. So make sure your paper doesn't have holes in them. This is wet dry paper. If you don't use wet dry paper, I'll repeat that, if you don't use wet dry paper, it'll fall apart immediately. I'm going to run from 400 to 800 and I'm personally going to polish this up to 1,000. I'm not going to do all that. You're going to do like 400 and 800. Remember not to cut too black. We'll try to cut it with 120 or 220. It's extremely difficult to get 120 or 220 swirls out. That means there's larger particles and less per square inch, and you're just kind of trying to mow that material off. 400 is still a pretty smooth wet dry paper that can cut a lot of material off, and it's kind of a happy medium. It'd be better to work a little longer with a 400 and some water than try to get done really, really fast using a really abrasive pad. And then you're spending more time on the subsequent pads trying to get it back up to finish without sanding swirls in it. And I've gotten something where I'm hitting 2,000, 3,000, and I start realizing when I'm seeing my swirls, I have to drop right back to 400 and work it all over again. So it would have been easier if I'd have started with 400, which is why I never do anything more coarse than 400 unless I'm in a special circumstance. You're going to see this will turn down which by a $600 sander, a DA. It's a random orbital sander, but you can also buff with it and polish with it. It's variable speed. It's very awesome as far as it'll outlast 10 of these, even though these cost, 1/6 the price. So you do get what you pay for. If I was in a customer's house, I'd always try to dry sand if possible, but if I was ever in my shop, I'd always probably just wet sand. Just with a vacuum, so I'm not getting this speckled mud look everywhere. You can keep that down with towels, but it just turns into being a lot of work. I'd wet sand if I needed to, but if I could dry sand by getting it cured more, I would rather wait and let it cure and then sand it. If the customer's okay to wait an extra day and not forcing you to sand after 12 hours, then just wait another day and dry sand. No, I'm just trying to keep it nice, even and flat. That is a big deal. Don't dig in at an angle. Just try to work fast. You end up with a wavy surface. So if you do have any little divots, dents, scuff those out with Scotch Brite or your sandpaper by hand first, and then sand around it. Otherwise, you're going to have a little glossy spot after you finish everything. So sorry about that. Okay. No, you were, and I apologize. I'm making a mess over here. So. Just so you know, I joked a lot about the weed. If you do vape outside the restaurant in public, that's not legal. You can smoke and do whatever you want to in your own car, but you won't be back in my class if you do that in front of the restaurant, because I trust those people a lot, and I bring a lot of business to them. So there maybe was somebody vaping in the parking lot yesterday. So, and then when the people I spent $100,000 a year with call me and ask me to be careful about stuff like that, it fucking pisses me off. So that's, and I'm starting a restaurant, I'm hoping, so. Ramen, because my little girl loves ramen, so.
Oh, we don't have one either.
Nope. Would you eat there? Wagamama in New York or anything like that? London? Oh, it's the best restaurant in the world. I got a 2,000. Do I have an 800? Oh, there it is. That is an 800.
What do you check for any spot now?
No, because this was a pretty flat sample, I'm pretty sure I got them all, so, but it wouldn't be a bad idea.
Does direction matter when you're
No, I usually just try to work at both directions. I'll work in around my edges usually, and then I'll usually run one direction with a lot of overlapping passes, and then the other way with a lot of overlapping passes. A lot of people are like, it's like they mow their yard, and they go up here, and they come back down here, and then they go back up here, and they come back down here, and they try to make 6 passes because of the measurement. This is something you have to just kind of work and massage it in, take your time. So, yeah, and you'll get better and better at sanding it with time. I am not an expert at this, so somehow people have paid me to do it, though, and I don't know why, because I had this kid that worked at a body shop that was, pretty sure he smoked crack, I'm not sure. Yeah, probably he smoked in the parking lot, and he was so amazing at polishing anything. So, rough life, but amazing skills. He'd been polishing automotive for like 10 years or something, and he was like, oh, let me polish that out, and I was like, oh, man. And then I was like, holy crap, you're amazing. Right? Oh, yeah, we'll keep reusing these pads until they're not cutting anymore. Yeah. One thing before I bump up to the 800, why I squeegeed it off and checked with my hand, I'm checking for grit, because you drop one 400 grit part that pops off that bonded pad onto here, and then you just spray more water and throw your 800 down. You're pushing around some of that 400 grit on there while you're bumping up to 800. Then you keep going up through the grit, and you'll see these weird swirl marks everywhere. Those are particles that were dropped on here. So wet, I usually try to squeegee it off and then make sure I'm checking for grit with my hand to see if I was leaving anything behind. You'll immediately feel if your pad was delaminated.
You want it to dry between
No, no.
800, just keep it wet.
No, you just don't want particles on it. If I was trying to do these edges, I'd be doing them all now. I just don't really care about them because it's just a sample. I'll show you. You'll love
When you're doing a countertop, you don't really worry about
I do if I'm deglossing. So something I'll show you guys right now. This is an 800 grit.
how do you do
I would spray a satin urethane into it, and I would just let it overspray the top, and then I would sand only the top. And just like the chiseled edge out there that's deglossed, that's exactly what I did, and you can't tell the transition at all. That was a very good question. So think about this, nice profiled routed edge, steel wool. You can crimp it into there like fine steel wool, and Scotch Brite back if you can find one that's a very high gloss one. So just be thoughtful of that, because as he said, not really. I mean, you don't want to sand epoxy adequately with your second coat, so you're just really deglossing. So, but yeah, be careful, because if you do have coarse edges, that's why you use this. If you had a sharp edge and you sanded it, it'd be really easy to bump right through, or on the corner and you immediately expose down below, and you are doing another coat right there just to fix it. So. Now, if I was doing this in a house, I would have pulled that pad off before it contacted anything and put it in a bag or something like that, a Ziploc bag. If you set it on the surface, the same place you set 400 grit and all these other grit, you're going to contaminate that pad, and it'd be better to throw it out than use it again. So those little details just save you so much time and money. How do I know that? I've worked really hard and not had very good results before. So we got paper towels or rags and the wax. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. You guys are all going to want to touch my piece after I finish it. Looks like it was in the White House too. Bill Clinton's White House. Our president's smart enough to go to Mar-a-Lago or something.
I like your apron.
Thank you.
I like your apron.
Thank you. Flour or corn?
Huh?
Flour or corn?
Flour or corn tortillas. I like a good corn tortilla. Oh man.
I know.
Yeah.
Some Mexican queso. You ever try to make a tortilla? Looks like the fucking United States.
Yeah.
Like, look around. Look when somebody like them does it, and then I try it, and I'm like, well, that was a failure. What's that?
I was gonna.
Oh, yeah. Now, make sure this is dry. You can get a little applicator or whatnot. This is a nano coat, very UV resistant. I would put it on everything exterior. You don't want to absorb this liquid onto your rags. Make yourself a little pad. Take your time. Don't be like I am. I'm an impatient person, so.
Oh, that is so pretty.
When you cut this, by sanding it, you really expose a different part of the grain that's sunk down there, and you end up with more like a cut open geode, sanding it. Now, this is not going to be polished. This is purposely going to be deglossed. So, something deglossed, you're going to get about 30 or 40 square feet out of one of these bottles. If it's shiny and you never sanded it, maybe you even ran just an abrasive polish on the top, you get about 60 square feet out of one of these if you work hard enough. If you put a big pile in one place, it'll evaporate quickly. Do little spots and work your way down your piece. This is meant to fill all the little molecules to make it more chemical resistant, slightly more heat resistant, and very UV resistant. You can apply multiple coats of this. Sometimes I've done jobs where I knew they were going to get a lot of use. This is very scratch resistant as well, and this will cure and keep hardening for about 10 days. So take your time, put a few coatings on it. We're not to wash this with anything, some light soap and water for about 10 days. So I wouldn't do this on a floor. This is more for countertops. So I'd do it on the floor if I thought it was super high use and they were going to pay for this. So yeah, and I'm massaging this down into all those molecules. So you're not trying to with this. You're actually working it into any of those open molecules. So, and you can see it starts getting dull. Just keep working it in. Take your time. It's kind of like waxing something.
And that little bottle
Stuff like that.
cover how many square feet?
How many square feet should this bottle cover? Yeah. Sorry, I did that. I just explained something and somebody asked. I'm kind of a dick, but you're actually really nice. And so you've been paying attention the whole time. There's a lot to absorb. Sometimes I like to ask to see if I really communicated it well enough for anybody. Because sometimes I'm not the best communicator. Wait, blank. We did that. You're not trying to wipe it all off. Guarantee some of this is coming off. Wait 10 minutes. Yeah, it'll keep the satin finish. Thank you. You saw what I was about to whack it.
I did.
Because of the epoxy, it looks like it comes out all the time glossy.
I poured, but we sanded it. It's big now coming in. Satins and stuff are really coming into where people are loving them now. So I'd rather satin. I hate gloss. I hate. My green truck out there was like the douchiest white truck. I hated it. So chrome everywhere, chrome handles, chrome mirrors. I was like, it was such a good deal. The most expensive countertop I ever installed was real soapstone. That was my biggest money. I was like, holy shit, we can soapstone. And then people would be like, dude, I'm paying $100. Can you save me something? And I'd be like, I'll be half price. And they'd be like, so sweet. And you're like, the most expensive epoxy you've ever done. And you can pour it thick as you want, take all the time in the world. Pass that around if you want to. Feel the top versus epoxy.
This is water soap.
This actually is. There is some solvent in there, so.
And that retains no sheen except for.
Yeah, exactly. This just absorbs into the molecules and then just totally dries off. So it's pretty nice. All right. If you guys want to trade out with them, and then we're going to let you all come back and take turns running through spots in here. When you do come back in, if you sand your piece, I would do only sand one piece. If you want to do something kind of cool, do we have a roll of tape? One thing customers love, home marble. Soapstone. Oh, that's black marble, never mind. If you're doing the soapstone, this is black marble, but if you're doing the soapstone with a charcoal base, if you want soapstone, it needs to be owned. Soapstone is not glossy. Reason being, it's soft epoxy. So something I do on a lot of these that comes. I bet Hunter gets lots of girl customers. I had this dude that was so good at talking to girls, and he was a salesman. I never really thought about it. And I'm like, oh, I'm at another 45-year-old lady's house again. Huh, another 40, another. And then one time he's like, hey, can you run this bid for me? I couldn't make it. Sure. And she's all dressed up in a little tiny skirt and a tank top. And he's like, where's Dan? And I was like, well, he told me to run the bid. He told you to do the bid? She was so mad, and I was like, damn, I just noticed my customers went from like 50-50 to like 90-10, all females in your age group. So, and they get real angry when you sent me there, so. Yeah. Yeah. All the guys were like, dude, girls always tried to mess around with me. I'm like, well, I must not be that good looking because that's not happened to me. So. With makeup, there's always weird things that happen, but nothing that was like a common thing. Nothing I would have participated in. Oh, you're good, dude. Did we just have enviro wax a little bit? Yeah. Loved it. That was actually one of the first thing I started enjoying it again because anybody ever heard of Carl Icahn? That was the first granite countertop I ever saw. Was in his house, and didn't know what it was. He had a real slate roof that was like pieces of cut slate, and I think it was a $33 million house that they said he'd never been to, and he'd never probably ever be there. So fucking waste of damn money. But I was like, those countertops are awesome, so I wanted to do it. That's why I started doing granite. And I one time got to see a granite countertop as amazing as his, and I did a few, like the soapstone one was like $180 a square foot. It was really cool. It wasn't, 90% of my jobs were Ubatuba or Galileo or however the fuck you say it, and Verde butterfly and 6 different colors that were in a low price point, and I just got really sick of it. And when I got into this, I started being able to be as, as creative as I wanted to be and start doing some of the better marbles and stuff like that customers didn't really want to pay for, or they didn't mind paying, but they had too many seams in wrong places and couldn't source the right slabs. I have this right here. So I did. Do we have scissors, you guys?
Yeah.
Oh, there they are. Ish. Yep. My guess. Like
Maybe an inch. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. This is Enviro wax. This is just a food grade wax. We sell it, probably buy it from different places. Nowadays, with everybody being so scared of everything that people will smoke and eat McDonald's and do all kinds of shit, but if you put yellow paste wax on their countertop instead of something that they this grade, or something they think the FDA approved, even though the FDA doesn't give a fuck about you. They're going to pass out. So. You know, all our premium epoxy now, as of 2 months ago, is all BP free.
Nice.
There's no countertop epoxy in the world that's BPA free. Yeah, we're still making them with a new epoxy. We kind of like got good at what we were doing, and then we just decided to completely try to revamp and change what we did. And I'm surprised at how hard it is to retrain and explain things that really do matter.
So is this something that you have already, or are you going to talk about?
That's what we just did. You were in there. Yeah, we just, yeah, you're fine. Is this a totally new group?
Not yet.
Okay, I was like, the only people I was talking to are still here. Shit. So, so there's a great sample right there. A great way to display so the customer can choose what you noticed. Notice in the gold where there was a lot of gold, now you just really toned down. This is more of what you'd see as far as rust in a slab if there was iron deposits. So you'd very rarely see something that, I mean, not in a white marble anyways.
Can you get this back to this?
Yeah, by polishing up to 5, and that's what I'll do next. So. Yeah, 400 and 800, so yeah. Oh yeah, it'll even be better if you do it, but it takes a lot of time and skill. It's only, yeah, just a few, just because it's real fresh, so.
So the wax just sprayed on, is that something that you would have to continue doing throughout the years? Or
Yeah, and if they were worried about it, I'd give them the bottle. It's like $9 or $15. I'm not even sure what this costs, but it's not expensive to leave them with. $11. Leave that with the customer, and that'll last. I mean, they could do their countertop 20 times. That's way longer than they're going to be alive. So, if you did an old person.
I mean, because you're going to get that question, so.
How often?
Yes.
I say, I don't know how you use your countertops. Are you eating out every night, or are you cooking on your countertops and sliding the fillet around? So, I usually, I'm not going to answer. If people just want to know how often, and if I tell you like once every year, you're going to do it once a year.
Right.
But maybe you're out of your house for 9 months. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
So I'm an organic caterer also, so I'm going to make some of these for charcuterie boards.
Oh yeah, that's a way to do it, man. And healthy. There you go. So,
Thank you.
anybody else want to see this? You guys want to switch out? You guys all want to stay in here? Most of you guys, I will be honest, shouldn't do this. So, not to be a dick, but this is a lot of work, and it's a real acquired skill that's difficult to get. You see all the air bubbles in this line? I grabbed this off the wall. In there, you see all those air bubbles in the veins? Those are all going to be little shiny divots in here, so you're going to see them all, which is good. You'll notice what to do. I should have torched this again. Yeah, I'm going to sand it kind of flat with 400, but I'll work my way all the way back up to 5,000. So, if anybody else wants to come in here, you can. Don't worry about sanding.
I just offered one of my clamps, so I have one in my pocket. Try that out.
You serious? This is off one of your clamps?
Yeah, from home, and I happen to have it.
Holy cow.
Through the washer machine.
Nope. Damn it.
Always find shit like that in the washer.
That's pretty
You
nice.
didn't buy that thing yet, or bring one, did you?
I'm gonna drop
Why
it.
do you prefer the sanding over the
Because you profile when you sand, so you have a firm back disc, you just get a really flat top when you sand. Even though you might not notice the difference, like you scotch bright a countertop and you can get a good look. You actually sand a countertop and you'll notice what a flat profile sheet you have. And I actually learned that from a guy I sell to. And then he started showing me, and I noticed the difference. And then he's like, do this, and he came back to a class, and he really talked me into doing things differently. And he does, the thing he does is very professional. And he said, I do this on every countertop, and I was like, well, you're not wrong. Saying that. What's that? Oh, that's a badass anything, Rick. I beat the shit out of that 2 weeks ago. I have to fix some frame damage from going 85 over some whoops that were 4 feet deep in a rock. So we took that to King of the Hammers. So that was our film crew chase vehicle for the 4619 race truck that won last year. And got 5th this year.
That's what you're doing here since we just arrived in your group.
Right now I'm spraying water. And I'm using a 400 grit sanding disc. You'd be a good grandma. I never really had a grandma, so. Yeah. I do remember the one time I remember meeting her much, I drew a picture and I go, like, and she was like, that's interesting. And I learned later, I was like older, and I was like, oh shoot, that was a really polite way to say it. Sucked. How'd that work out for you, Grandma? Thank you. And I'll leave that corner original so we can compare it. Mitigate dust, and it also, on a pressure epoxy pour that's 24 hours old, you can cut epoxy a lot better that's not fully cured using water because it cleans your disc. So I just ran a 400 grit sanding disc on there, and I believe it's very important the next grit until you know you profiled everything you need profiled. All those little holes, I still see them. That's fine. You're not going to get rid of them because they're low spots. You're not going to sand all the way through them and have dips all over your piece. You could come back right now. We could squeeze this all out, spray some alcohol, clean those out, dry them. You could actually color match epoxy, put little drops in each one, take a razor blade, clean it off the next day, and repolish. It'd be an easier way than pouring the whole top probably, but you'd still be into it, you know, an extra 2-3 hours and then coming back the next day to finish what we could have done today. Torque those veins enough. So just little thoughts. One thing I see is people will bump up to the next pad too soon and they haven't really profiled what's underneath. Does that make sense? And they have to go right back down to the lower disc. The next thing is a bump up to the next pad, go to an 800 grit, and they don't really work it long enough to get all the 400 grit swirls out of it. Then they have to go back to the 400, run it, and then back up to the 800. You won't usually notice that you didn't run 800 enough until 1200 or 2000, and then you have to go back through all those steps. So, experience. You'll get better and better. Yeah, when you squeegee it off and dry it, you can. But even that doesn't matter. You'll really just have to start getting a feel for it. Being very organized, knowing the places. I notice a lot of people, they'll pass across this 10 times, and they have no idea where they hit and where they didn't. And they're like, and I've asked a lot of people, hey, do you know if you got there? I don't really remember. Like, be thoughtful and organized and crosshatch. Yes, sir.
That's what I was going to say. Is generally when I teach somebody to sand, you go one direction then the other. And if you think about it, you're creating lines in different directions.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why we do 2 directions. So.
Are you changing grit now?
I did change grit up to 800. I did set it on there, making sure I don't have any of the sanding grit. Now, I squeegeed it off and cleaned it because I don't want a bunch of 400 grit from the first pad getting pulled back across the top because I'm going to try to get a shine out of this. It'll contaminate that, and I'll have a bunch of little swirls. Since I have to say everything a second time and I keep forgetting, if anybody smokes weed at the restaurant outside, you can do it in your own vehicle because I won't know about it. You can't stop that. You won't be asked back in the class. You'll actually be told not to come back in class because that's disrespectful. And when the owner of a restaurant calls me and asks if our students were smoking outside, fucking pisses me off. I spent a lot of money there. So don't smoke weed. is still illegal. And if you do it at someone else's house, I don't mind, but not at my customers' places. And I told you guys out at the beginning of class, if it happens again, I'll be rude in front of class. With water. And a fast tool would be okay. These pieces I poured are still a little bit fresh, and water would still work better. So, and since I don't have that much more time, I'm blessed with all of you guys, then I want to make sure we can show you how to get it done if you're stuck in a time crunch.
So if we're in somebody's kitchen and we're trying to do this and up onto the floor, any suggestions?
I wouldn't do that. I'd have a towel and clean it up. So if you're in a customer's house, you're responsible to make sure whatever you need to do, your job site's clean. Again, I would probably wait in a job site, and I would get a vacuum sander and say, can you let me have 24 extra hours, get the room up a little hotter, put a heater in the kitchen or whatever, and heat up the countertops so they dry enough to dry sand. So, and if you have a good vacuum sander, it works very well. So if you put enough vacuum in the back of one of these, it actually works pretty well. One thing you can do is run an extra long hose, put a vacuum in the coat closet or outside the house if possible, if you can reach, and then any exhaust that even gets through that vac, at least it'll be outside. So vacuum sanding also makes the pad last a lot longer, so just like water does, if it's a wet, dry pad. Again, what I need to go over again with you guys is be thoughtful. These cheap sanders here, they're made to suck air through these holes. That's why I don't have my pad, or I'd be sucking water up into here and creating mud.
So what's a safe time after you do the countertop? Basically, it's like
24 hours if it's good heat, yeah. Water, if you're in your shop, I'd run it 12 hours after and just use water. I wouldn't be that concerned. If you were going to polish, once polishing, the polish will work better and better as the more. So it's kind of crazy. If you polish something like a month later, it's going to polish significantly easier than even 24 hours. This is 2000, and then going to 3, and then 5, and then I might do a polishing paste and then a wax. So. You know what? Trade somebody? Thank you. Thank you.
was so looking forward to coming on vacation and not picking up a fucking sander.
Oh, too bad. It's for your little girl, man. Everything you do is, right? My little girl wants to be a boss. I'm like, no, you got to be a leader. We'll teach you how to do that.
That charcoal is black.
That's. I was wishing it was a soap film on, and I realized it wasn't. So.
It seems to be graying out a little bit.
Yeah, that there's a lot of white marble in there, or white pearl that I sprayed in there, or dripped in there. You'll see once we wax it, it'll be a very, very flat black. So now, at least this is very profiled. I'm really doing this, guys, and making sure I'm not contaminating this rag. I'm not even going to feel the surface without cleaning my hands. You're going to feel a lot of stuff with your hands, though, once you have a clean hand, that you'll never see with your eyes. So if you really want to inspect something for smoothness and grit, feel it. I can tell I just pulled more grit off the side of this, so you're not going to want to step up to that next grit without doing this. You're just going to be grinding swirls back into this countertop. You also don't want to pull them off the side back into the piece. Now, usually my lower grits up to 2,000, I'll use just a thin pad with no bit foam backing. The foam back pads cost quite a bit more. These are like 12 bucks a piece. But now, I profile like a high spot to cut it off. I'm just trying to polish. So now I'll go to a foam back pad, and it works pretty well. So I'm going to run it up to the 3,000 now.
The same pressure? Or just kind of...
Yeah, a little more even now. You can kind of start putting more and more pressure as you get to the finer pads. Kind of like dig in now, fine pad. So you're really only going to see more of a sheen difference here and a very little bit of dust. You're going to see less and less of the actual goo coming off. You'll definitely see it, but it's not going to be a pile of it.
So if you were doing this, say, a week or two from now instead, you would be doing dry instead of wet?
If I wasn't in my own home, I would be trying to do it dry, but since I'm here in my shop, I'd do this. So I'd do whatever you want. So do whatever works best for that job. Now with your fine pads, don't move too fast or you'll hide the water and it won't really be digging down in and working. So edges, you're going to use steel wool, Scotch-Brite, something that you can scuff down into there and do it. If it's a chiseled edge, you're going to spray a satin urethane on the side, let it overspray up on top, let it completely dry, and then sand the top and leave that transition. Yes? It's not food safe. You're going to have a lot of problems in any kind of restaurant or anything getting in, and it's a thin milk coating, so any dust is going to create you problems. Our urethanes are so hard, they're actually very difficult to sand and polish. As soon as you do sand thin coating, you're going to see a difference in sheen because of the density of them. So if you sand through it in a spot, you're going to see where you urethaned and didn't urethane. So I personally believe urethane coats are something to not do unless it's a real big commercial job where that is really mandatory for them. So I did a bunch of stuff for Halliburton. I had to urethane all that stuff. So, but very good question. I don't like it on countertops. So just because I feel like it leads to more problems than it really solves. So usually people can post cure their epoxy with some heat lamps and get a nicer, harder cure anyway.
But you would do it on a bumpy profile side just because it's almost impossible to sand.
Yeah, you can't sand into it, but you're only spraying, and that I would just use a water-based urethane right from Lowe's or Home Depot right out of a spray can. Be careful, don't fog the kitchens, the customer stuff up. I know a lot of people spray paint houses, and I don't understand it because I see a lot of problems with it.
How about the roll-on?
Roll, yeah, paint whatever you want to. I stick to painting walls. No, I never actually paint anything, so. You guys can do whatever you want to, so I'm never here to say you can't do something. I'm just telling you what I view as unprofessional, and depending on what you want the future of your business to look like. Would you want to be the rattle can guy that has coatings failing and you win in a few years? I just have my opinions on it. So, and I've done it before. One of the highest viewed. What's that? Yeah, and once you're trying to scrape razor blade paint off a cabinet or a window, you're going to be in trouble. So, or they start smelling it, or it yellows because of the overspray. There's a lot of reasons why not to. And again, that's just my opinion. I've gotten blasted online for saying that, but fuck anyone that doesn't want us to.
Well, if you just spray your baking powders with alcohol, at least if there's overspray, once the alcohol evaporates, you just
Washes right off. Yeah, wipes right off. Just to get a little quicker because I'm impatient. So, and now it's 5,000.
One of your highest viewed what?
High speed?
You started to say one of your highest viewed, and then you got cut off.
Oh, one of my highest viewed videos, I had spray painted a little bit in the countertop and then lit it on fire. But I did a little bit. I started seeing yellowing. I called the chemist. I started realizing some of the reasons why not to. And I started replacing some and having to. And it didn't happen for 3 to 5 years on a lot of them, but I saw it significant. And what I saw is a lot of yellowing, not where the color landed, but where the actual overspray or the accelerant hit the epoxy. So, and it was significant to tell. So I don't want to build a business that within 5 years I'm like, oh, better go sell Melaleuca oil to a bunch of dumbasses. So if you sell Melaleuca oil, that's awesome. Don't ever fucking call me and invite me to dinner. Thank you, somebody I know that did that, and I waited for you for like an hour. And they're like, are you sure you're not with the Melaleuca oil people? I'm like, no, I'm not with those fucking people. Promise you. So that's who I was supposed to be with. And I said, why would you do that? And you invited me to dinner. And he goes, oh, dude, if I told you I was trying to sell you something, you wouldn't have came. And I was like, yeah, no, not when you want to eat with me. So.
holes in the bubble, but that's not going to affect it.
No, it's not. 5,000 grit. Now, if we want a perfect shine, we would run this to a polishing paste. An ultrafine McGuire's, Flex, anything. We're going to have a very awesome shine, but this, you could even get it shiny. Let this cure a little, or ran on a polishing paste. Say again? Any kind of machine polish finish is much harder than a non-machine polish finish. So. And you can warranty the job by giving the customer one of your pads, whatever your final finish was. Now, it's pretty uncommon running it back up to 5,000, but running it up to 800, 1,200, 2,000, very common. So. Say again?
It hardens better for machine polish.
Yeah, but polishing a floor is a little more work, and we're not going to cover that. But yeah, definitely, I have polished floors before. It's definitely a bit of work, but you can actually use all the same automotive polishing grits, but you're going to be wanting to use a larger polisher, of course, with some white pads, and you'll just be going through a lot of material. So.
Now, are you adding a second coat of clear epoxy on top of this afterwards?
The ones that I cut like this, I generally would. If I wanted to just degloss a normal finish, where I don't need to cut in to the actual finish to get the final look, I would run the clear coat of epoxy and degloss that. Clear coats are very hard to see damage in versus an actual glossy base layer. When you see the base coat and you get a scratch in it, it's easy to see. When you get a clear coat, it really protects. For starters, clear coats can actually cure a little harder and quicker if you don't have a bunch of alcohol being sprayed and all the different things that you're basically contaminating epoxy with. This will dry harder, and you can roll them a little faster, so you can run hotter. So I'll run my clear coats. I don't even want to say this because you guys are going to go and pour everything at this temperature. Don't pour your fucking coats at 95 degrees. Don't. I would pour my clears at 95 degrees because I don't need working time. I'm just trying to spread it, let it settle, let the air come to the top, and pour it off a few times. I'm going to get a really hard finish like that, so just be thoughtful of that. Now, as you can see, this isn't perfect. Where is the... No, I kind of think if I was running a shop still, I would. If I was in charge of all the jobs, I think I would probably at least run just a polisher over the top. And probably run a foam back pad and just polishing paste. And I'd only probably try to sand with an actual firmer pad if I saw high spots or something I was trying to get out, a hair that landed or something like that.
What's that?
This here is a nano coating called Diamond Shield. I'm going to massage it in. This goes 30 to 60 square feet, depending on how much sheen you have on your countertop. If you open it up to like an 800 grit or something like that, you actually would only get about 30 square feet out of this bottle. So be careful with it. You don't want to just throw a big paper towel down and wipe it around, or you're going to absorb half your money right into your pad. So.
That nano coating is super heat resistant?
It is added temperature resistance. However, it's not going to add temperature resistance to the substrate that you're on. So still be careful with temperature, anything over 500 degrees. This is very UV resistant. It does cure for about 10 days. So try not to wash your countertops with anything super abrasive for about 10 days. And it will add scratch resistance and whatnot to your job. So.
Would you also put that over your secondary clear if you didn't?
I will coat everything for sure, because I've never seen a bad side effect from that ever. So.
How is it for water spotters? Is water?
It's amazing. Yeah, nothing will ever stick to this. Yeah, nothing will stick to it. It's very chemical resistant. Showers and stuff like that. My sister said she's never had to clean a water spot out of her shower ever in several years. So.
I know. Applied with glass white Scotch-Brite.
So when I lived up
Yes.
in Mesa, the water would turn everything orange.
Okay.
It was so bad. So this would have been a great.
Maybe in a few years when I stress more, I'll just start taking showers up there.
So how often do you want to apply it then to like a kitchen?
Probably depending on use. You shouldn't have to apply this very often. I mean, once a year would be a lot. So if that. So. I mean, it depends. I like to cook, so probably more. But if you don't put a lot in your kitchen, you probably could get away with years without it. So. Now, I'm going to dry on here and do everything perfect because I've got to go and get you guys ready for lunch. So. I'm going to pull the finer grit. I'm not expecting you guys to do this. If you want to, set up down here. If you're high, don't touch it because you'll just hurt. Yeah. Anybody want to touch it? Hate to ask like that, but. All right. Be careful if you're using this. Use the clamp. Hit myself right in the dick with a sample one time when it gripped and spun the sample. And I tried to play it off like it didn't happen, and then I just almost fell over. I tried to stand there, and then I was like just about to cry. Oh, it was a bad one. It was like level 9 of anything I've experienced in the nuts. So I tried to stare all happy, and I just couldn't, and I almost puked.
those big replacement handout.
Oh, I've done that before. Whip something in your.
Right about.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, you saw that? It was so annoying. I hate sagging pants.
Except a couple because they haven't put their names in the back of it.
If he didn't put your name on the backs, he's not going to urethane them. Otherwise, he'll urethane them during lunch. I'll be honest, guys. I don't know that you take them home if you urethane this. It's fucking cold outside. It's way below the recommended cure temperature in the urethane, so it's probably not going to dry in time. So.
Can we pick it up tomorrow if you're staying in town, or is anybody here to?
Yeah, you can come in if you want to, but you can go.
Oh yeah, we're not gonna stay.
Gotta get the fuck out. No, I'm kidding. So, no, you can definitely come in and check it out. A lot of people try to get an extra fracture class, and I have so many things waiting for me. So, but there will always be somebody here to take care of you guys if you need to be in the building. So I just won't be able to handle 40 people at the same time. So, and he'll show you where it is. Yeah, usually I'll fill them up and let it just barely overfill it. I'll take any excess off, and then the next day I'll take a razor flat, and I'll just kind of scrape back and forth until I profile razor vertical, and just kind of shave it down until I'm flush with the coating around it, and then start polishing that spot. And it's better to polish if you're spot polishing. Start with your 400 grit, smallest, 800 grit out from there, 2,000 out from there, 3,000 out from there. And you probably want, when you're at 3 and 5, just to polish the whole countertop so it blends in, if that makes sense. So, and, yeah,
Or what is the process for that?
thing. Just as soon as you're done, whenever you get back on it, 6 to 8 hours later, when you can do it without denting it, pour a clear coat. Whenever you want to polish it, you polish it just like this. Yeah, if you want to, not polishes their countertop. So this is usually you're going to sand because you're trying to degloss something for a customer. My final thing was polishing it, so everybody wants to polish it. Nobody can polish right now. Don't polish. This isn't the time where we're going to go for 22 hours of polishing classes. I kind of showed you the basics. I can tell you that if you want to polish, you're going to need to get some of your samples out, all the subsequent sanding things, and you're going to work at it, and you're going to fuck it up, and you're going to work at another one, and you're going to fuck it up. Don't do that in a customer's house or you look like an idiot. So I have struggled trying to polish things before, and I'm still mediocre, and I've done a lot of them, so that's... Hire a little crackhead from a paint shop.
I think I noticed what the polishing is like. Can you hone it down?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people love the honed look, and then even people that started out wanting to polish, they've asked us to come back in, or our installers to come back in later. It's kind of nice because you damage less if it's honed. Any kind of real gloss, especially a see anything on there, any inconsistency. It's tough to polish, especially this is so fresh. It's going to be tough to polish that out. So
So it still gives you a high gloss look.
it's back up to a 5,000 now. So, you know, you're not going to just run an 800 ever to a high gloss.
So if they wanted more of the dull, flat look.
Stop at 800, and then wax that or nano coating.
Treat the edges again. You're just honing it down. You wanna...
Scotch-Brite or steel wool.
Okay.
Edges. And really watch your corners. You're going to run through your corners real easily. So just be careful. That's why I do steel wool or something. And I would run all my corners first so I can sand everything else into it. If you try to do all your corners and your edges last, you're going to see all these scuff marks that don't really blend in. It's real easy to do your final sanding on top and run into them. It kind of hides those overlap marks, if that makes sense. So put in first around your edges and then sand the surface in between. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're going to have more class this afternoon.
Do you want to do your exit on the live?
Oh. See you guys later. We're going to do a floor. It's a glitter floor after lunch. I hope we value to something you guys do. See you later. He's here for the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, shit. I better hurry. Hey, Kim. Well, I guess they shut off the line. Do you want to help manage their flow? Just make sure.
Yep. Everyone. I know. Everyone's getting
Hey,
that.
let's go to lunch right now. Sorry, guys. That's it. Stand. Don't stand yet. No too much.
How are you doing, Simon?
Good.
Good. Good. Good.
Yeah, we met in
How was
December.
how was that class that you guys had in the
What, in
UK?
December?
No,
Oh,
the one that
sorry,
you
last
just
week.
had. Yeah.
Oh man,
Was it
brilliant.
awesome?
Yeah.
That venue was sweet. He
What, the
sent us
barn?
pictures.
That's it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
13th century.
Yeah.
You see him with his fire in there, and I was like, oh my god. They
You're like,
will not
"Oh."
let us back if they see him. You know how he like. I think it was 19 in class, and yeah, the feedback's been brilliant.
Awesome.
Really good.
That's sweet.
So,
Yeah, I heard that you're gonna